that's nice. It talks to you now. Tells
Well,
you
it
that it's
does. Yeah, got it.
recording in progress. Are you locked down, mate?
Hey, buddy. Yep, locked down.
We went over this last time. World champions.
Yeah, I listened to a couple of our last episodes today just to make sure we don't double back on what we've gone through, but it seems like we're going to, I think.
You're just a fucking Groundhog Day every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
So do poo tubes still need wrapping, or they've shut that down too?
Yeah, they do. No, I've been working, which is great. So better than last year.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been on a big job site, which is nice. Plenty of work there. Yeah. It's good.
So are the military keeping busy in Victoria, or they've just all concentrated on Sydney now?
Get
those people off the beach.
They've gone to Sydney. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, don't breathe the fresh air.
How fucking ridiculous.
It's interesting that New South Wales is kicking up a storm that the military are there walking the streets, but we had them walking the streets last year.
Yeah.
So, and we had them at the divide between metropolitan and rural, and to get through there, you had to go through like full-blown military checkpoint at the beginning, and then they sort of waned it back a bit, and it wasn't so brutal. I went through a bunch of them. So, yeah, well, it was pretty brutal. It was pretty nerve-wracking the first time I went through them, but then after you've gone through them a few times, it was just good to go. So, yeah.
Yeah, we had the situation in New Zealand where Auckland went back to our level 4, which was just like don't go anywhere, and so they put up a border at the bottom of Auckland, and I had to go pick up Billy, and yeah, it was a bit of the same, like gigantic queue to get to there's a demarcation of Auckland that's called the Bombay Hills. So you climb up this big hill and you're at the Bombay Hills, and from way down in the town, probably, I don't know, 20k south, Pocono, the queue started, and then you went off an off ramp, and saw the military, and it was quintessentially New Zealand. It was just like, oh, hey bro, how you going? I was like, yeah, I'm good. Yeah, what are you doing? I was like, just going to pick my daughter up and go back to go for that. Oh yeah, have a good day. And then on the other side, it was like, what are you doing? I was like, I just picked her up and going back to Kofar. They're like, oh, does she live here? I was like, yeah. I was like, where are you going? Oh, to Kofar. So, oh yeah, that's cool. Carry on.
Wow.
Yeah. No. Yeah, they did ask me for papers, but then I was like, oh, I didn't think I had to have papers for this. And like, no, you don't. That's cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, there's a big distinction between like the first time I went through and the last time I went through.
Yeah.
It was interesting. The first time it was military, police with guns.
Gee.
They had every one of them had an iPad, and they would take a photo of your license, and they would take a photo of your piece of paper that you had to get through. And that went on for a few weeks, and then the lockdown went for I don't know, 6 to 8 weeks or whatever. But then by the end of it, I was halfway through. I'd been working, so to speak, all about the place, and I went out to go for a walk in the bush with my bow on a mate's property, and a lady policeman looked at my paperwork, and she goes, "Geez, you get about Victoria, don't you?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do." She's like, "What do you do?" I was like, "I'm a plumber." And she's like, "Oh, okay. Well, that must be nice. Have a good day." And then the last time that I went through it, the guy was doing the crossword on the side of the road, and he goes, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Wilson's Prom." And he goes, "Oh, right, yeah, have fun there." So it just went from full on to next to nothing. So, and then, I think that everybody's just gotten used to it in Victoria, and they just shut the fuck up and do as they're told. And so it's quite interesting. Now New South Wales is copping it, and they didn't go through it before, so they're all like kicking up a storm. And it's interesting to see the different states deal with it in their ways.
Yeah. What do you reckon the vibe of the guns was? Like, that's pretty intense. You there? Did you hear that? I said, what do you reckon
I think it was of the guns.
Yeah.
Yeah, Look, I think they were just putting their foot down because they didn't really know what was going to happen. And they were just like, right, well, let's create this thing called the Ring of Steel that they created. And yeah, it was brutal, but there were definitely ways around it. And one of the main ones up the Hume Highway that sort of goes from here to Sydney, you could come in around the back way and go over the overpass. And they had the block underneath the overpass. There were a couple of exits that they had the roadblocks to get out of metro into rural, and they had those roadblocks underneath the overpasses, and you could just hoon over the overpass and onto the highway. And so people were just texting people and telling people how to get around it. But yeah, the last 2-week lockdown that we went through, I went out to near the Waddingtons to visit a friend who was in need, and no cops on the road anywhere. And then I had a highway patrol pull up behind me at 140. I was in the right hand lane overtaking a car, and this cop pulled up behind me and put the lights on. So I pulled over, and he went flying past me and took the car in front of me. And it had big flashing lights across the top of his highway patrol car saying COVID checks. So he pulled that car over, and I was like, oh God, like there's nobody on the highway, like very little people on the highway. And so I went past him, and then he came up 10 minutes later behind me again with his lights flashing, went flying past me, took the car in front of me and checked their papers. And then he did it a third time. So it was 3 times on that road where they got the car in front of me and they didn't get me. But, you know, I had ladders on my roof and all sorts of stuff, like all my work material. And I'd been working in Shepparton out in rural Victoria anyway. So, yeah, it is what it is. And it doesn't seem like you need paperwork to get about anymore, but you need a bloody good excuse. So, yeah.
Plus, they knew your van, and as the lady before said, gee, you get around, and they're taking your photo and taking your driver's license and taking your number plate. So they're like, oh, yeah, there's Andy again.
Yeah.
He's just a plumber.
Work in rural Victoria. Yeah, that's right. I'm not even a plumber.
Yeah, just rap pipes.
It's been interesting, my mindset as far as that stuff goes as well. It's like what I said to you last time, I didn't really want to take the piss. And, you know, if it's about community doing the right thing, you do the right thing to a certain degree, and you don't really want to. I only really got out there when I was in a mental headspace of really needing to be in the bush. And you know, when they tell you 2 weeks, it's not as bad as when they tell you it's going to be, you know, a month and a half or whatever. You don't really, your headspace doesn't get that sort of oppression like feeling to it. But they always kind of, the last few ones they've been like, it's just for a week, and they extend it for 2. Or so yeah, we'll just see what happens, and we'll play it by ear and see how it goes. So yeah.
In New Zealand, I've just tuned it all out. I just see Jacinda say, oh, you know, we can't go to Australia anymore. I'm like, oh, well, I wasn't going anyway, but just started a new job, so got no holidays. Although I'm having 2 days off for my birthday, and I was checking my payslip yesterday, day before. I was like, oh, yes, I've got enough holidays earned up to have my holiday. Fantastic. But definitely not enough to come to Australia. So
for sure. You'd be in 2-week lockdown either way, whether you've been vaccinated or not vaccinated. So, yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah. I had a couple of conversations today and yesterday about the old vaccine. It was quite funny. On one of them, dude in Canada, I said to him, I was like, mate, have you got your Justin Trudeau tracking device in yet? And he was like, oh, getting vaccinated, you'd have to be mad for that. I was like, oh yeah, I've got both. And he's like, oh gosh, I didn't mean to insult you. I was like, no, you didn't insult me. I was like, I was making fun of it to begin with. Like, yeah. Did you listen to Rebel Wisdom talk to, I get confused, Eric Weinstein or Brett Weinstein?
Yeah, I did.
Who's the one that's not the dark horse?
Brett.
Oh, Eric.
Brett is the dark horse and Eric is the portal.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, so
yeah.
It was quite inception-y. Eric and I think his name's Brian as well on Rebel Wisdom, talking about Brett talking about ivermectin and the confusing landscape of science, mate. How did you find that one? Like that was I liked what Eric had to say about how despite uncertainty, despite he knows that pharma's nefarious, he got the vaccine. He didn't get Pfizer, he got something else that was more of a traditional vaccine. Yeah.
Johnson & Johnson, maybe.
Yeah, I think that was what he
Not sure.
went with. Yeah, no, it was because that's what I said. He was saying, I know Johnson & Johnson are freaking scoundrels.
Yeah, they all are.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You've been sort of tracking. What's the data that you're tracking? Where's that coming from?
Oh, look, this is a rabbit. This is a massive rabbit hole because data isn't data anymore. And science isn't science anymore.
Yeah.
This is the thing. It's like I should put it straight up. Like I'm not like I've been vaccinated to the hilt, not with this vaccine, but in my previous, the previous life or the life before now,
Pre-COVID.
And yeah, pre-COVID, I've got every vaccine under the sun, and I'm not anti-vaccine. I'm what they would call hesitant at the moment, so that's why I've been trying to keep my eye on the ball with everything that's going on. And but when you say you've been looking at the data, it's an interesting thing to. At the moment, it feels like it's science versus science and data versus data, and the scientific inquiry of people being able to have genuine debates about things has been thrown out the window. The data isn't available for us on the ground in Australia, or maybe in America, or maybe even in Europe. There's those three main platforms of the open VAERS system of the reporting of the adverse event reactions in America, and then there's the yellow card system in England that tracks their adverse events to the vaccine, and then we've got the Therapeutic Goods Association in Australia. So trying to find the data inside of that is an extremely challenging thing, because some things aren't being tracked and other things are being tracked. And then even inside the reports that the big pharma is putting out on their data front on what reports are coming in from them, there's still data that's missing from all of those things. So in the States, just to give you one example of that, it's in the States when if you've been vaccinated and you have an adverse reaction to that, you put yourself in, because you get a vaccination number. So you put yourself into the adverse reaction, the open VAERS site, and you put in your number of your vaccination, and then you can write a report.
Yep.
Then that report gets closed inside the system. So if you have a blood clot, you put in your report that you had a blood clot. Well, that data is then closed. So if that blood clot next week then turns into a terminal illness and you die, the report is closed. So it doesn't come up as a death. So if you get a terminal illness, then that data isn't getting shown inside that system because you've made your report. So it's a similar thing in Australia, and I'm not sure what it's like in England, but if your partner gets vaccinated and they have an event and they can't make the report for some reason or another, you can't access their medical information or their number to make that report for them unless it's your child or
dependent, yeah,
or a dependent, yeah. So what's happening at the moment in the States is if you've been vaccinated and you contract COVID, you don't go into the system unless you've been hospitalized or it's fatal. So they're not actually tracking the people that have gotten COVID after a vaccine in any way, shape or form. So we can't really get a direct. When I say data is not data, it's like there's obviously going to be a certain number of people that have contracted COVID after they've been vaccinated, but that data is not available unless they get hospitalised. So data is not data as far as that is concerned. So I remember last time we had a conversation, we were saying that anything can be cherry-picked. Any data can be cherry-picked. And I think that the scientific inquiry about opening up discussions between A scientist and B scientist is a very much needed situation at the moment. And if A scientist is saying something that goes against the narrative, then their voice gets wiped out by big tech censorship, and that those conversations aren't really made available. So that's why that conversation with Rebel Wisdom, he's had a couple in a row. He's had one with one of the Weinsteins, and I can't remember her name, but the lady who was very pro ivermectin, and he laid out a series of questions in the sense making series of how do we make sense of what this lady's saying, how do we make sense of what Brett's saying, how do we make sense of the anti-ivermectin crowd. So inside of that, obviously, voices have been wiped clear off the social media big tech platform that is making it very hard for people to get that information. So, it's an extremely challenging time and very, very frustrating for somebody like me who is trying to find truth inside of it or trying to find which side of the fence I would like to sit on. It's super challenging, and I think that the crunch and the pressure, it's a very pressurized situation for everybody at the moment of what to do and how to go about it and how to find that information. And I find if it's only coming from one side and it's getting censored on another, then where do we go from there, and how do we make those decisions that are going to be best for our health?
Mate, how are you sort of one, finding the space to take it all in, and two, how are you navigating, like you said, data's not data, how are you navigating your information sources? Because there's narratives being pushed which way and every way. First, how
that's
you finding
the challenging thing.
Yeah, how are you finding the space to like sit down and take it in and you know, venture down these rabbit holes? You're a professional rabbit hole navigator from your history, mate.
Yeah, I am. I love it. Look, I try and look on the pros and the antis on both sides. I'll do everything from what the government's telling us and jump down the rabbit hole of the Therapeutic Goods Association and watch the news and watch what the government is pumping out and try and get their sources. And in Australia, it's the Doherty Institute that's doing a lot of the research there. And then I'll look on not the anti-vax, but the vaccine hesitant virologists and epidemiologists and those sorts of things, and try and find those people's voices who are being stifled. And
what was the basis of the Doherty Institute? Is that a university organisation?
It's a government-funded institute who's they're virology experts. Okay. So I'll look at what they're pumping out and I'll read all those sorts of things. I'm lucky that I've got the time to do it. I mean, whilst we're in lockdown, we're not allowed to go anywhere or do anything. So it's like I may as well be jumping down that rabbit hole and trying to find out. But like the Trial Site News website, is a website that's been running for years. They've been going since 1990. Not the website itself, obviously, because the internet wasn't really around then. But they're the major people that deal with all drug trials around the world, not just COVID stuff, but every drug that gets released gets updated into their system. It gets reviewed. They've got an amazing staff that reviews all those things from stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 clinical trials, all that sort of stuff. And all the information is there. And when you go to do a drug trial, you put into that system before you do the trial of what you want to get out of it, what you think your results are going to be, how many people go into it. So they are very good at deciphering the information that then comes out the other end. And if people if people put in that they're doing A, B, or C drug trial, and they want to get a certain result, and then they don't give those results after they've done stage 3 clinical trials, then there's a big upheaval inside of those doctors and that community of why those results weren't given or why the results were skewed, or so they've got a very sort of impartial look at things. They're quite proactive. Like their website is like, this is doctors who are affiliated with us. This is an opinion piece. This is not researched yet. So it's very open to a view as far as a viewing platform goes. And they've got amazing interviews on there with people who are pro or people who are anti or people who are not, discussing things like ivermectin and fluvoxamine and all of those different things. So just try to jump down each one of those little ones and get as much information as I can. And then if I find something by somebody who's written something on that website, then I'll try and find them on YouTube or try and find them some other way and see what papers they've written and where those studies come from, and then look at what the rebuttals to those are on the other side, with people saying, hey, this India study was flawed in this way, this study was flawed in this way, and then try and, I'm no scientist, but like, just for me, it's good to look at those things and try and figure out where we're at and why these things aren't being implemented or why they are, or, you know, just do some quick math on what it's costing Australia to implement all these things, and wonder why there's not more frontline treatment programs for people who have actually gotten COVID. Like, when was the last time you heard anything about a frontline doctor treating COVID as an illness rather than using a vaccine to prevent the illness?
Yeah. Before we dive into that, like you said, you're not a scientist. You know, people that have listened before will go, "How the hell does a skateboarding artist know all this shit?" Like, what's that website so called?
Trial site news.
Trial site. Yeah. Did you start diving into that with the sort of psilocybin study stuff, the MAP stuff, or where did you first hear about that?
No.
I've heard about it on Tim Ferriss and on Peter Attia, and Tim Ferriss probably got it from Peter Attia. Where did you first find about that?
I came across it on a website or a YouTube for a doctor who runs a thing called Peak Prosperity.
Okay.
And he's a doctor, and he's just been researching, and a few of his things were like, these are articles from here, because he gives all his sources to all his information. And this is probably about 6 months ago, and then I was like, wow, this is a really huge website. And I think it was just that process of like trying to find the proper sources of information, like that are unbiased and they're not
sensationalized by media slant, eh?
Yeah.
No, that's how have you developed your paper reading skills? Have you looked at, like, again, Tim Ferriss and Peter Attia have got some resources about how to digest a research paper? Like, how have you sort of developed those?
Oh, they're not great.
Stats 101.
They're not great. Yeah, for sure. But I mean, like, I'll take notes.
Yeah.
I'll take notes. I've got a great notebook. I'll just sketch out stuff. I've, got stuff all written down. And then, I mean, the numbers and letters and the things, it kind of just, it's in and out. But I'll just take specific points and then come back to that the next day if I've come home from work or something. And then I'll look up that specific thing. And like, I'm better with people talking than I am with actually reading. So a lot of that stuff can be cross-referenced with people talking, and then you find somebody who's a virologist who's talking about that specific paper, and they've done the breakdown of it, and I'll go to work the next day and I'll just listen to that guy talk about that paper, or talk about that paper and 5 other papers and why this one negates this one.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I'll pull my phone out at work, and then I'll put in another note in the notes in my phone, and then I'll come home and I'll look up my little thing at home. And yeah, it's fuck, I don't know why I do it, but I've got to search for information. So yeah.
Do you think it's sort of giving you an element of control or like personal sovereignty about your own decisions? Because it's just a screaming match out there.
Yeah, it's a massive screaming match, and that's the thing that I'm worried about, is the screaming match is only going to get louder.
Mm.
Like, and if you don't have the ability to regurgitate information when somebody's screaming at you online or whatever it is, then where do you go? And a lot of people, this is the thing for me that's the scary thing at the moment. This is becoming the wedge between the pros and the hesitant is getting greater, and the screaming is getting louder, and the pressure from the government and the media is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And that's the really scary thing for me at the moment, is not COVID itself. It's the what's coming next and what is the end goal or the end game of what's happening. And that's the thing that scares me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was
sorry. Yeah.
No, I was talking with Ken today again about vaccine, and I was like, I had to make a decision because it was like I got classified as frontline worker, and it was like there was the opportunity to have Pfizer, and I was like, wow, I'm going to do some things around it to protect myself. I know you listen to Matthew Walker around sleep and what he was sort of saying about the effects of good night's sleep and flu vaccination. I sort of took a gamble, and so did my one of the other directors. We both took the same idea around taking high dose vitamin C. I sort of implemented what Ron Patrick had talked about early on Joe Rogan about separating the dose out across 3 doses throughout the day, and she seemed to think that there was evidence that actually managed to get your plasma vitamin C up quite high, as opposed to 1 dose. You've got a sort of an absorption limitation on that. So I did that.
That's right. No, wanes quite quickly.
Yeah. And so I did that for a good few days beforehand. I was still training. I was making sure I was getting outside, getting some sunlight and things like that. I'd had a blood test a month or so before, like everything was going well. I hadn't been sick. And so I was like, right, now it's perfect.
It's a good time.
Yeah. Did it. It was completely fine. But then, on the other side, my flatmate had it half a month before me, and his first dose gave him a bit of fever the first night. Then my other director at work, his second dose gave him a bit of fever, and he took the day off work. And then someone I know through someone else had an anaphylaxis the other day. But then that person was, allergic to many things, was an MS person, and I was sort of like, if they'd been asking me the opinion of like, should I go get the vaccine, I would have said, there's probably a lot of things that you need to get right before you have a vaccination.
Yeah.
But that's an adverse event, and quite an adverse event, having an anaphylaxis, but was well managed, and the next day was fine and was able to work. And that's an individual that normally does struggle to work. They have chronic fatigue and things, and it's amazing what a few doses of adrenaline can do for you. But
for sure.
There's adverse events and a bit of flu-like symptoms aren't the end of the world. But the pros want to disregard that, like, nah, there's nothing wrong. And you're like, well, there's risks and there's reactions to everything. This is a foreign substance. And like I say, the wedge is people getting so heated and narrow-minded about their stance that, like you say, the hesitants or the considered people don't have a place to stand. They're feeling alienated. And like, if I hadn't been frontline worker, I would have waited because, as I just said before, I wasn't going anywhere. So New Zealand is a little, haven, and there was no urgent need. Like obviously with the rollout, I would have had more time and more information, but at the time it was like, right, I'll happily do this and do some things to make sure I'm okay.
That's right. And it is what it is for, you know, like each to their own, and everybody's got to make a decision either way. And like, I back my friends' decisions.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a well thought out decision, like that is the most well thought out decision and the way to go about it that I've actually heard. Like, and I know, you know, Kent's decision, and I know him as a human, and I know what's going to happen around that, and I know a few people who have gone and done a similar thing, probably not to the extent of what you've done, and you know, like my parents and their friends and the people who are in that elderly community, and it's like, go and do it. Like, my dad's history of medical stuff and like stroke and things like that, and or Bell's palsy and all of that was a bit stressful for me, because I was like, oh, there's all these reports of Bell's palsy, but like, he's not fit and healthy. He's not he's had 2 nervous breakdowns. If anything does go sideways and he gets really sick, like, that's going to be fucked for him. So like, make that decision, do those things. And people that I know who are, you know, well overweight and maybe on the obese spectrum, it's like, go and get it. Like, and more power to you. And I fully respect those decisions if they're made in a way where they've researched the information, they know what's going on, they've made a decision for their own health, and they're going to go and do that thing. I'm like, fuck yeah, go and do it. Like, so I mean, I've got pretty bad autoimmune disease, and it hits people quite strongly with autoimmune disease, like COVID does. And I'm still unsure about like where the vaccines are at with those sorts of people as well. So like, that's one of the reasons behind why I'm so interested in it, is because I've got pretty severe psoriasis, and that affects other parts of my life. So yeah, it's just an interesting that's one of the reasons why I'm so interested. I'm really kind of, I don't know, it's such a big topic and so stressful at the moment for so many people, and you hear decisions that are getting made by people that I question those decisions, and I question their logic, and there's scary things that are sort of coming out, and the things that the government has told us 5 different things and in 10 different weeks, and then, you know, you're going to be able to travel, you're going to have your freedom, you're going to have all of these things, and I don't believe those things. Yeah. I'm very scared of what's going to happen with that. There's a case of a young guy who had a heart condition, or he had cancer or something. He's on his deathbed in Victoria, and his mum's been double vaccinated, and she's living in New South Wales, and she just wants to fly down to Victoria to see her son before he died. And so she's applied and done all that stuff, and then all of a sudden she gets rejected, and it's like, well, you've told us if we get vaccinated we'll be able to travel.
Yeah.
And it's like, what are you saying? So there's so many levels to that game as well, as far as like Australian citizens and what the Australian government has recognised as an appropriate vaccine. So I think in Australia there's 4 appropriate vaccines. So say you're an Australian citizen and you're living in China, or you're living in Russia, or you're living in India, and you've been vaccinated with what their government deems as an appropriate vaccine, but the Australian government doesn't deem that as an appropriate vaccine, they're not going to let you back into the country. So does that mean you're going to have to get the Chinese vaccine or the Russian vaccine, and then the Australian ones as well? You're going to be triple vaccinated for this thing. Like, where are those boundaries, and where are those freedoms, and how are they going to come? So those are the things that at the moment I'm super worried about. Like, if you look at what's happening in the EU with vaccine passports, so France has implemented it so that you can't have a coffee and you can't sit in a restaurant unless you've had a vaccine passport. So we use that as one example as a vaccine passport. For me, this is where
New York is talking about it too,
for sure. So if we look at that as a case study and we go, the EU is an open border policy at the moment. So you can travel around the EU, England, everywhere without a passport. You can just fly into Europe, check your passport in, and you can go to any country without checking your passport. So then what happens if Italy says we want vaccine passports and Switzerland says we don't care about them, and France says we want vaccine passports for public transport, and then Germany says we can travel on any public transport without a vaccine passport in our state, then you can say goodbye to the EU. That means that travel between those countries is not free anymore. That your civil liberties have been removed by one or two countries that are mandating vaccine passports when the other ones don't. So that's going to create a shit fight. And it's not just going to be like mate versus mate, where you're like, oh, you've been vaccinated or you haven't, and I don't want to hang out with you because you're not on team A or you're on team B. Or Queensland says we're not going to mandate, but New South Wales is going to mandate and Victoria is going to mandate. So then it's mate against mate, state against state. Then it's country against country. So then there's so many levels to that vaccine passport game of, well, which ones are appropriate and which ones aren't? Where can you go? What can you do? New South Wales is implementing in construction at the moment that you can't go back into those areas that are in total lockdown unless you've been vaccinated. You can't go back to work. So they're not implementing a rapid antigen test on the job site where you can get that test back in 10 minutes and know that somebody doesn't have it. There's so many levels to that game that I don't are really putting a long-term agenda onto of like what is coming and how we're going to navigate that. And then I think the scary part will be the people who have been vaccinated will say, well, I don't mind because I've been vaccinated. And really what's going to happen is everybody's civil liberties are getting stripped away from us by the day. And those people who have chosen to do a certain thing because they think it's right will then allow for the whole of Australia or the whole of whoever's civil liberties to be taken away one step at a time because they're the righteous ones. And this is a really weird argument because it's kind of like I'm sitting on the fence, but looking towards the future of people who have already been vaccinated and saying to me, well, I don't mind. I already need a passport to travel, which defeats the purpose of the fact that more of your civil liberties are getting stripped away. And how do we deal with that if half the population has been vaccinated and they're going to be fine with that? So there's so many levels to this game of what's happening and how's that pressure forming and it's how we're going to navigate that. And the Australian government has already said, you know, the tracking system of the scan in with your QR code.
Yeah,
we're not going to use that for anything. It's going to be private knowledge. But there's already been 2 states in Australia who've then gone and tracked criminals through that system when they said the police aren't going to have access to it. Nobody's going to have access to it. And they've already gone against that, which is against the civil liberties and against what they've said. So it's just like one step after another of losing our rights and our freedoms. And so, yeah, it's a challenging time to navigate all of that.
Yeah, and that's what I was talking with Ken about. I was like, you know, it almost becomes 2 separate arguments that people were trying to tangle up into one. And it's a bit like the whole Democrat versus whatever they're called. The 2 sides and
Republicans, red versus blue.
Red versus blue. That's easier, right? But it's like, you know,
versus skins.
2 teams, isn't it? But you know, it's like they say, you could ask anyone in America how they feel about guns, and then you can basically infer how they feel about abortion, how they feel about free speech, how they feel about, you know, a long washing list of things based on what, like you say, shirts versus skins. and it's we're bundling the same thing up with people's personal health, and you know, their considerations and where they're at along the story and how much attention they pay, what type of person they are, and we're making it something binary like, have you been vaccinated yet? And I was like, well, I'm probably intending to. I have these considerations, and I'm just trying to make myself feel a bit better so I can make a decision. Glad for you that you've been able to make the decision. My situation's different, and it's kind of like that little bit of empathy, and yeah, it's kind of like, well, as someone that's been vaccinated to then say, but I don't think having a vaccine passport is a very good idea, and still kind of,
Well, that you get put into the reserve team, mate. Like you get put onto a shelf
yeah,
where they're the reserve. You're not in the A team anymore. You're in the B or the C team, and maybe you don't get a say. That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and like you're saying about sort of case studies with France, for example, in vaccine passports. It's also like you're saying about these QR codes and you know, busting up gangs and criminals and things like that under the same guise. It's the same that you hear. Who's the guy that's now living in Russia that busted out the Patriot Act?
Snowden.
It's the same idea, isn't it? Like, oh yeah, now we're not tapping your phone calls. Yeah, we're tapping your phone calls. If we want to look at you, we just press the button and look up your file and go, who you been talking to? What have you been saying in social media? You know, it's like that's a case study, and it's like, you know, oh yeah, no, the QR code's just for so if there's an outbreak, we can see everybody that's been in the vicinity. But also, if we want to know where Joe Bloggs is because he's a dodgy fucker, we can see exactly where he's been too. And they can kind of already do that with Google tracking and things like that anyway. But it's another way that you kind of give up that freedom of navigation and walking around the city that you live in and you choose to live in and, you know, contribute to and pay taxes for and all those things.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And there's actually jobs available at the moment in Australia for contact tracers, and they're full-time jobs that are available for the next 5 years.
Right.
So if you have a look,
so is that
at
like
the
data analysis? Like, say they have a case and it's like, right, go through the data and notify everyone.
Yeah, and see who they've been in contact with and where they've been and how many shops they've been to, and then we can notify the shop owners, and then we can notify the service station and see where they've gone. So
amazing system.
Yeah, it's absolutely unbelievable. But I mean, that just says to me that if there's jobs available now that have a contract for 5 years, they're not just going to stop.
Yeah.
Like if COVID gets under control and it turns into this thing where like we can get our freedoms back and we don't go into lockdown, then those people who've been given a job have a 5-year contract. What are they going to do after 3 years if COVID's not around anymore? What are they going to be tracking? What are they going to be doing? The government jobs.
Yes.
So they're the things that we've got to really think about as a team, and not be like shirts and skins of vaccinated and unvaccinated. We need to come together as a collective and be like, no, fuck that. That's not right. So, and the stuff that they're doing with it now in New South Wales, I found that yesterday or the day before, they locked down a town called Tamworth.
Yep. Because
one person,
country music capital of Australia.
Country music, yeehaw. Yeah, that's right. A suspected case of somebody with COVID who had come in contact. So this person had come in contact with somebody with COVID. They didn't know whether that person had COVID, and she travelled to Tamworth. So they put Tamworth in a 7-day lockdown.
Right.
Just from contact tracing. They knew that she'd gone there, and they were like, we don't know if she's got it or not. We're going to lock down that entire town. And then they were like, on the same day, in the same news conference, in the same 5-minute segment, they said, but in the end of July, a guy with COVID had gone to Byron Bay, and he's been getting about Byron Bay since the end of July. So we recommend that everybody in Byron come and get tested. They didn't lock Byron down, but they locked down the whole of Tamworth because someone who they suspected had come in contact with somebody with COVID had gone there. So there's double standards to this guy's been in Byron for 2 or 3 weeks getting around with COVID. This guy went to Tamworth, might have come in contact with it, So it's like there's levels to all of these games of what the government is prepared to do with this information and how they're going to handle it. And that's a scary thing as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. On the
It's
phone.
like putting a band-aid on your arm before you get a cut and letting the other cuts just bleed out. Like,
yeah. On the comedic side, Jimmy Reese did a great Byron Pistake today.
I didn't say.
I was just like fucking Byron Insta ladies and their Insta boyfriend getting the right light and things like that. And I loved it as well because they were like, contact tracing. Did they not go to whatever and tag Harvest? And I was like, Harvest isn't even in Byron. It's in Newbar. Get it right.
Sure.
But I was like,
they didn't go to the drum circle on Sunset and just lock everybody up.
Yeah, I was like, nah, always tag Harvest in Newbar. It's a great place.
For sure.
Yeah, I've had a couple of podcasts with Greg Emerson at that spot. It is quality. It's one of the places I definitely miss. Have you seen?
I don't know. People watching.
Yeah, oh yeah. I don't know what her name. I think her podcast is called like That's a Lot or something like that. Is some radio bird, and she's got it's been doing the rounds, and she's saying about how she lives in Bondi. She's like the South Byron. And she's saying how her and her mate from Perth must be the only people in Bondi that aren't anti-vax. And then she goes on and says, I'm against the vaccine. And she's like, I know you take ketamine on the weekend. Have you seen that one?
No.
It's like, you don't trust the vaccine. You take MDMA every weekend. Like, get
sure.
fucked. But then it becomes like, it's funny, but she crosses the line because she's like, I don't want to hear about you not taking the vaccine. Actually, shut the fuck up. And I'm like, well, you're not helping anybody by shutting them down. But yeah, it's just like this whole mix between like, that's funny, but also you're being a little bit serious at the same time. And like shutting someone down is not the right thing.
Well, I said to a mate today, I was like, he said something about the vaccine. And I said, well, the drug companies aren't liable for anything. Like, if you get shit drugs from a mate, and they put you in hospital, you can go around to that guy's house, grab him by the throat, and punch him in the face. It's like you can't do that with the drug company. There's no like so at least there's accountability to buying drugs off your mates.
Yeah, you might end up in prison for a different charge, but yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, as we're saying with the vaccine, you might end up in prison for not doing that too. Yeah, at this rate. Did you tune into the Yeonmi Park episode with Rogan?
Yeah, I listened to her on Jordan Peterson a few weeks before that.
She's on Lex Friedman as well. I've got that loaded down.
Yeah.
So I want to listen to that again because that was fucking harrowing.
Yeah, I couldn't because that Lex Friedman one came out in between the Jordan Peterson and the Rogan one. I couldn't listen to it on Lex. I was like, fuck, it was too heavy on Jordan Peterson. But then when she came on Rogan, I was like, it's going to be a totally different interview style. Yeah. And fuck, it's the heaviest story. And like, I think you texted me a few days before that and you're like, there's been some heavy podcasts.
Yeah.
Like Human Lab and people like bursting into tears and breaking down on podcasts. And like that one made me cry at work, the Rogan and her.
Oh,
like,
yeah. Especially at the end, I was listening to it last night and I was just like,
yeah, the last hour was just brutal.
Yeah.
Like, it's fucking brutal. I'd recommend everybody listening to it and just shut the fuck up about your privileged life. Like, fuck.
Like you're saying in the last hour, she was like, I like fought for my freedom as a 13-year-old, escaped from North Korea, starving, walking across a frozen river, make it to China, get sold, watch my mum get raped, end up with the next person, they rape me, end up with a third person, they make me their mistress. Then I walk across Mongolia, they take me to South Korea. South Korea are made to feel like like scum because they're racist against North Koreans. I have to basically convert to Christianity. And then I realized that Christianity's exactly what the Kims prescribed to the country. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
this never fucking ends. And then she goes to Colombia,
No.
and it was like, now I'm fighting for my freedom of speech, and I'm told that I'm a racist.
Yeah, totally.
I was
Totally.
like, it's not funny, but you just like I put up a post. I was
Yeah,
like,
don't come to class because we're going to talk about these subjects and it might trigger you. And she's like, how could it trigger me? Like, I've been through everything. You guys have been through nothing, and it triggers you guys, and it's not triggering me. And you guys are asking me what my pronouns are, and I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? You guys can fuck. It's heavy.
yeah.
She's so on point though with all that stuff. It's so amazing to have such an amazing speaker and so well educated now to talk about what's happening in those universities. And yeah, it's huge.
And it was amazing. Like, books on your to do list are the Orwell stuffs, and I haven't got into them, but I know they're an education, and for her to say, oh yeah, that like helped me understand what had happened to me in North Korea, like when she was saying about how there's no words for individuals, no words for love, rape isn't it's not even a concept, and anyway, life's that shit. Anyway, people just go missing. It's just like, Joe Rogan just keep going. I was like, man,
yeah.
Can you just like pause for a moment?
I think the thing that got me in that, I think the thing that got me to break down was when she was talking about she did MDMA therapy with Rick Doblin, the MAPS Foundation, and that was the thing that made her realize what love was, and to be able to feel love. And to give love and to be love and to share with her partner and be open and that just cracked my nut wide open. I was like, holy crap! Like, such a powerful tool for someone to go through all of that and then to be able to have that opportunity to have MDMA as a therapeutic option inside therapy with the world's best brains, to be able to like really have her deal with her trauma and realize that she's a being of love and available to love. And it's just like, whoa, that's super powerful. Like, yeah, it definitely pressed a button in me.
Yeah, one of the things that made me, it kind of sparked a bit of anger was when she was talking about going to the UN and like how they sat her beside North Korean diplomats and like gave her no protection. And then basically swept it under the rug. And then how she said about how North Korea, Hong Kong, and Tibet are like buffers for the Chinese National Party. And I was like, I've been following the sort of the veganism, World Health Organization, Eat Lancet, slop diet revolution for the last few years, and been frustrated with some of the shit that comes out of the UN. And then COVID again was like, what's going on with this characters? Like, they're up to some shady shit. And then you hear
what they released today.
Oh fuck! Well, yes, did you? A couple of days ago, 14 grams of protein.
14 grams, bro.
Did you see Dr. Brad's picture of 14 grams beside a 20-cent Australian piece?
That's one mouthful or two. Like, this is what blows my mind. It's like the UN and the World Health Organization, they're in bed with each other. Like, how can they come out with a statement like that for health? Like, how can they come out with guidelines that are going to fuck every farmer so hard? It's unbelievable. Like,
and then on the other hand, talk about climate change and stuff like that. You're like, you people have no idea. But like the scary thing for me is like hearing her talk about like North Korea and China and about like oppression of food, and like going through COVID and shit from the last few years or 2 years, and seeing these little like Chinese National Party, whatever they're bloody called, influences coming through the UN, and hearing that perspective of China and North Korea, and you go, is that what the UN is about? That it just like oppress the people, and then you hear about like InfoWars, the elites, and you're like, well, who the fuck are these people? Because they're real dicks. Can they piss off?
Yeah,
Yeah, like especially
Yeah,
in
can they
countries like New
also
Zealand
stop?
and Australia, like fuck, what are you guys called? The lucky country, and
Yeah, a
we're
dollar.
nicknamed God's own, and then it's just like, yeah, no, we don't want any of your amazing produce anymore. Like we're going to the slop revolution.
Yeah, how about you fuck right off and stop telling us what to do,
Yeah.
because you're not helping.
But then, like, we've both developed these markets in these countries because of promises of feeding the world and good quality proteins and free ranging animals and all that sort of stuff. And then it's like on the other side, the people running the organization like, nah, we don't want that. We want to lab grow and soylent the shit out of life.
Feedlot. If it doesn't come from a feedlot, they're going to charge $1.50 a kilo excess in taxes if it doesn't come from a feedlot.
Hmm.
What's that going to do to our farmers? What's that going to do to our environment? This is what I mean at the start of our podcast when I said science isn't science anymore. It's like, who are these people who are doing the scientific research on what cows do, what feedlots do, what regenerative farming does, what row crop farming does, what the health is for the human body and how much protein and healthy fats they need? Who are these people doing these scientific studies and then giving them to the UN or giving them to the World Health Organization? Because if the UN comes out and says your daily intake of protein like should be 14 grams and they're accepting that, then that's when I look at like who are the people who are giving the World Health Organization their guidelines for what we're meant to do for our health as well. And if science isn't science on the United Nations side of things, then how the fuck can I trust what's coming out of the World Health Organization? Like, where is it that the general population can make any sense of it? Like, they just go along with what's pumped out of the media, what's pumped out of their government, what's pumped out of these big institutions that are so obviously corrupted and so obviously trying to push some agenda. And I don't want to go down a conspiracy road, but the reality of it is like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like,
But it's almost like I see your interest like in certain aspects. Like say it's Coca-Cola in the Olympics, you're like, I see your interest. It's McDonald's in the Olympics. I see your interest. You know, even like Nike and shoes, they won the most gold medals at the Olympics, and it's like, yeah,
yeah,
but we want to sell shoes, so we're still going to make shit in China, or Taiwan, and the same with cell phones. We still want you to buy a brand new cell phone every fucking year, so we're still going to make stuff on the cheap and not really have the best human rights policy around all this, but it's really cool. So carry on, and we'll keep pumping out advertising. You can see the bias, and you can see the intention, and you can see like they're trying to, foster their shareholders or whatever. But then you like look at the World Health Organization, you're like, what's the fucking point? Like, why are you here? Can you go?
yeah,
You're
yeah.
not
And
providing.
who are they? Well, they don't have shareholders. This is the thing. Like, who are the people that are the shareholders of the UN, and who are the CEOs, and who are the people behind it that are running it? It's like they're not voted in by anybody. Like, we as a people in our country and your country don't have any control of who's on the board of those things. We
It's
don't
just a
have
delegate.
shares in any of it. That's right. It's a delegate. So it's like even the shareholders, because if Nike or those people, if the shareholders, who are probably the top however many percent of the people in the world anyway, and they've got money to buy those shares, like they can actually put their foot down and go, we want to stop this as shareholders. But there's no way of doing that with the UN or with the World Health Organization. There's no way at all. And probably those people who are running those, like they're the people probably with the shares in Nikes and in Apple and in all of these places and in ExxonMobil, and they've probably got shares in all of that stuff, or their partners do, or whomever. And it's how do you break that down, or how do the people even get some sort of general understanding of how we can gain control back over those systems? Like, because in all reality, it's like if you just look at the guidelines that came out of the UN for health and for the environment, there's not one person in there that said, look, regenerative farming for the win. What we're going to do is we're going to end feedlots. We're going to put animals back onto the land. We're going to increase the nutrients in the soil by doing regenerative farming. We're going to try and bring back the health into the soil, and we're going to bring back water into our rivers, and we're going to increase the general biodiversity on those things by doing that stuff. And in turn, that will increase people's health because they're going to be buying better meat. And then in turn, that's going to stop a whole bunch of other ramifications inside of health from unfolding. So it's just crickets. Like,
yeah.
It just boggles my mind. It makes me so angry. And you just come across people who, that's like what's going to happen. I see in the UN when they say that they're going to get most of their meat from feedlots, is that will just give more power to the vegans and to PETA and to those sorts of people saying, look at the animal cruelty that's going on inside of this stuff. We've got to shut this down. It's going to make it actually worse for those people who want to eat meat. And it's going to make it worse for our farmers. It's going to make it worse for the soil. It's going to make it worse for the environment. They're going to be able to go, look, we did the carbon offsets from these feedlots, and the environmental degradation that's coming out of these feedlots is massive. And they don't go and do that same research in a regenerative farm and see what's going on with the soil nutrients and the water coming back onto the properties and all of those things. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, and on the same breath, the vegan will say, and if you look at the UN World Health Organization, they'll say that meat's, it's like smoking cigarettes. You're like, again, are you trusting that data too? Because that's a crock of shit.
Yeah.
It's funny you bring it up, like, soil health and vegetation and things like that. Like, I've moved from Hawke's Bay, which is a pretty barren place, to basically mill and dairy country here in Tokoroa in South Waikato, and shit does it rain. And one of the ladies said, probably doesn't rain as much as it used to. They've actually processed some of that timber. And I was like, you might actually be correct. Because men, like trees, they attract, and when it rains, shit, it rains. And that's the same like Northern Rivers, Northern New South Wales, Byron. Like, there's all that vegetation around that place. It's a bloody jungle up there, and man, can it rain.
Yeah, but I mean this is, it definitely rains. Tasmania, Northern New South Wales. It rains in a few spots in Australia, but I mean that there's so much water locked up in Australia. It's absolutely ridiculous. Like with the cotton industry, and our rivers in Victoria. And but sugar industry doesn't take the water that the cotton industry takes. It's on a different side of the Great Dividing Range. So the sugar is on the eastern side of the Great Dividing Range, and the water that's actually being locked up is on the western side of the Great Dividing Range. So our politicians, when they come into politics, they get a water allowance as far as credits go. So that means they get to own water. The politicians, as soon as they're put into office, they're given a certain amount of water. Like, they actually own water as soon as they become politicians in Australia. So it's like,
what do you mean by own?
Well, they get a certain amount of gigaliters, allocated to them as human beings when they become politicians in Australia. So then they can decide what they do with that water. They can sell that
as an individual, or as a representative.
No, as an individual. Yep.
What the fuck?
So they can, bro, it's fucking massive. It's the biggest scam ever. So then they can, they can lease.
Where do we find this information? Just like, I need to do an info wars on.
It's online. It's getting it out. Like, there's been a few amazing documentaries about it. But like, where has the water in South Australia and Victoria and New South Wales gone, and who's in control of it, and where are these dams and where are these allocations going to? Because farmers get a certain allocation. A lot of it's like row crop farmers or wheat farmers or cotton farmers. They get an allocation to use a certain amount of water that comes out of the Murray-Darling system. And then that water comes actually from Queensland. It's amazing. Comes from up in Queensland, goes all the way through New South Wales, through Victoria, and ends up in South Australia. And is no longer flowing into the ocean in South Australia because it's been taken along the way by all of these different row crop farms. And this is where the whole vegan cows use more water than row crops, which is just bullshit, but I won't get into that. But so the politicians get an allocation of water, and then they can decide between themselves or individually whether they go, well, I own 50,000 gigalitres, say, of water, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it to this person who owns this farm, and they can pay me to lease that water, which the which the Australian people actually own, and it comes out of the water system.
Yeah.
So then that farmer can give whomever politician, grab those rights for that water, and they can just suck 50,000 gigalitres of water out and put it into a dam on their property. And they're like, well, I've got the allocation to do that.
Yeah.
So our politicians are actually making money from removing water from our river systems and putting it into dams so that it can irrigate crops such as cotton and rice. It's like Australia is the driest continent on earth, and we produce so much rice, it's ridiculous. And it's like, what the hell are we doing producing rice? Like, we're not a tropical country. We're not in the, in the equator region where most of the rice in the world is from. And like cotton takes so much water, but it's like, it's just this scam that the politicians are allowed to be given water, like, and the rights to water, and that should be available to everybody. So then you're like, well, why has there been fires, or why has there been droughts, or why have there been these things? And it's because the water system in Australia is so fucked that it's actually creating all of these offset effects that then they'll blame on this thing or that thing or the other thing, and have outcry of, well, there's global warming, or there's global change, or there's been a drought for the past 6 years. And it's actually criminal behaviour if you really look into it. I suggest everyone having a look at some of the documentaries that are like, where does Australia's water go? Like, it's a hideous thing.
I think it might have been Peter Ballestead, and it's one of my big regrets that my podcast with Peter, unfortunately, his audio didn't work that well. It's out there, and if you can sit through it and listen to it, he does share some great content. But you're probably better off listening to one of Peter's interviews elsewhere. But I think he brings up the fact that, like, say the soil quality was 20 units. I don't know what the units are. Before this sort of type of farming happened in Australia, it might have been like 1900, and now it's down to about 5. And because of this type of farming change that's happened in Australia, that has become big scale row cropping types of farming. And I watched Eric Banner movie for last year, I think it was, called The Dirt, and that was again an area in inland Victoria that was just flat plain, rows and rows and rows, and of course dry as shit. nothing anymore. And yes, I think Peter talks about like desertif. Well, it might not even be Peter. It might be Alan Savory talking about like de-desertifying areas with cattle and manure, and turning over the land, and then planting. That's where that whole planting the tree thing, attracting the water, keeping the water, comes from. That the forest and the soil depth and the vegetation depth make such a difference. And it's just
I've definitely heard him talk. He's quite amazing.
Yeah,
but it's actually getting the farmers to go back to that. That's the hard thing, because they know that cotton yields way more coin.
Yep.
And they can get subsidies for growing cotton, and that they'll be able to take water out of the system for growing that cotton, but you're not allowed to take water out of the system for cows or whatever. And then there's that battle between green water and blue water, and what actually constitutes green water or blue water, and irrigated water versus water that comes out of the sky. And it's such a battle, because a lot of those farmers are like, well, we've sold all our cattle and we've gotten rid of all of that stuff because we can get more money out of cotton, or we can get more money out of XYZ row crop than we can, because the government are prepared to give us subsidies and help us out with that. And it's just a shame.
Yeah, so the economics of it, eh? It's a bit.
Yeah, it's economics.
Yeah, and like it's great that like New Zealand's just had a first carbon neutral certified farm, and they're working to be carbon negative.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's again, it's great when you get somebody that's marketing orientated, customer orientated, working on something that's significant. So I don't know if you've ever come across 42 Below vodka.
Yeah.
Yeah, and moa beer. No, there's probably
maybe
local
not.
to New Zealand, that one. But yeah, 42 below
Yeah.
and moa beer was run by this guy Jeff Ross. Is he any relation, mate?
No. Should look him up and give me some free vodka.
Yeah. No, you should just get some hunting access, mate. It's beautiful spot in the world.
That'd be good.
Yeah. So Lake Hawea Station's just been certified as carbon neutral. You know, it's a large scale sheep farm. They're implementing regenerative agriculture. You know, so there's a group in New Zealand, Quorum Sense. Had John O'Frew on the podcast to speak a little bit about it during lockdown last year. And yeah, it's just basically introducing these diverse crops for sheep and beef, and you know, on a large scale. And then they're working with you know, getting their gullies and things back into sort of native vegetation. You know, having large,
not letting the sheep into the waterways and.
Yep, you got it. Making you know, significant riparian plots. They're sort of combining with the likes of Air New Zealand, so you can offset your seat when you fly out to Air New Zealand, and part of that goes into planting trees, and that's one of the properties where the trees go. So, like hearing that,
where is that property?
So Lake Hawea is in Central Otago, and it's right next to Lake Wanaka. So Lake Hawea and Lake Wanaka sort of are two adjacent lakes, and they're separated by a reasonable mountain range. There's some good public hunting blocks between them and a couple of private ones, Glendine. But it's incredible part of the world, and you know, like Lake Hawea Station, you can look up on Instagram, see what they're about. But you know, it's great to finally have an example in New Zealand when people go, oh, you know, dairy and beef are just ruining this country. Don't talk about the fact that it's fucking 50% of our GDP more now that tourism's gone. And, you know, then they try to say that it's also 50% of our greenhouse gases. And you're like, just hang on. Like, where the fuck are you getting that number from? When, you know, what's the States one? They sort of said 12% is from complete agriculture and 2 or 3 is from cattle. You're like, and it may be just proportionality, but you sort of look at the amount of trucks that are on the road in New Zealand. You look at the, you know, the tourism industry. We're not close to anyone. Are we counting the bloody miles that whole plane load took to get here? Or, you know,
I mean, New Zealand's
it blows my mind.
Industry, for sure, it blows my mind. It's like, how can something that's got 36 ingredients, that's an artificial meat that comes from 36 different processing plants, be better for the environment than a cow? Like, this is the thing that blows me away. And like, to take it back to when data is not data, it's like, how are they getting these figures that they think that like it's going to be better for your health and better for the environment to eat a fake steak than it is to eat a steak from a cow? It's like there's 36 processing plants that process those 36 separate environments that come on 36 separate trucks into one place, let alone the machinery that takes to process those things, to extract it out of the ground, to make those products, to get it all prepared into one thing, when you've just got one cow on one bit of land doing one thing and might take one truck to get it to a slaughterhouse. It's like, well, the data doesn't add up. And so data's not data anymore, and science isn't science anymore.
Yeah, mate. Like,
I mean, I see it here.
Yeah, the farm I was on last year, like there was no irrigation there. For the most part of the year, it's grass they grow, and you know, the feed that they get off their own property. And it's like, you know, when I was there last year, it was a drought, and they had to get a few trailer loads of feed brought in. But again, it was like, I'm looking around the place going, okay, so where's all the carbon coming from? Like that grass doesn't go by itself. That's sucking in something.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, they've got like incredible pockets of tōtara tree, which is native, and you go walk through those pockets, and they're holding like really awesome remu trees. They got rata trees there. They got kakati, like all these awesome native trees. And you know, and my mate's just like wringing his hands, you know, dealing with the regional councils and the not national government, you know, our parliament government, and just being like, what the fuck? We're just trying to, continue this 100-year property, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, I see it with a couple of my mates. Well, one of my mates in particular who's got a property in Western Victoria that backs onto the South Australian border there. And the farmers around him, they say, oh, the babes have been kissed on the dick by the farming gods. And I don't know how many hectares it is. It's a massive property. Like, take you more than a day to walk around the whole thing. And it's like they've still got grasses in all their creeks and all their offshoots and all their runoffs, and the dams have got water in it, and they haven't chopped down all the trees. And it's like the people all around there are like, oh, well, they've been kissed on the dick by the farming gods. And it's like, no, his parents and his grandparents didn't chop down all the trees, and they did things properly, and that's why there's water on their property the whole time. It's like, it's not rocket science. Just keep the water in the waterways, and keep the native grasses, and keep those things that keep that cycle going, and you'll flourish.
Yeah, it was even funny talking to another mate who manages a couple of properties, owns one, and on the one that he owns, he was replanting trees, and he said to the guy that broke in the land, "Oh, mate, you did all that work to clear all the trees, and I'm planting them." And it was good to hear that the guy said, "Just as long as you're planting the right ones." And it was just like, they would have had to clear the land to make it viable, and so that they could turn it and get the seeds and stuff in the air and make it viable. But happy to see it return, somewhat to some native and diverse ecology is, it's what it's all about. That's one of the things we talked about with Johnny. There's all this sort of wokeness talking about diversity, but when it comes to our food sources, we want monocultures. It's like, do you see the disparity here?
Yeah, and Australia's got more grasses than like native grasses than it could possibly know what to do with. And those grasses have been shown to grow at a greater rate and be better for our soil regeneration than wheat does, and will produce more grain through those grasses than any imported wheat ever will. And it's just phenomenal that, like, where are these people who are so proactive about the damage that animals do? Where are they when they're, coming up with like, well, this native Australian grass is a seed that's very similar to wheat that's been used by the Aboriginals for thousands and thousands of years to make breads, and is quite capable of making a grain that's just as good, has better nutrient content than wheat, grows in combination with 3 or 4 other things that are putting nutrients back into the soil that will grow way better than wheat ever did. And like, so where are these balances of these people that know this information versus the people who are so anti what we're talking about, and they're just, where's the balance between that? How do we get that to come to fruition with trying to talk people into planting natives and planting things that'll be more proactive for our environment? And I think that just the disparity between like what people actually understand to be real inside of what's happening in their environment, as far as like taking milk out of it, from cows, and they don't want to eat cow's milk, but they're quite prepared to rip down a whole environment to plant almond trees that then use bees to pollinate those almond trees that are transported around the country in trucks or planes to propagate those almonds, and the damage that stuff's doing to the environment, and monoagriculture. But it's fuck the cows, bro. They're fucked.
Yeah, they fart.
So it's such a multi-pronged thing, and I think a lot of these things that we've been talking about today are so multifaceted that trying to get information out and trying to deal with people who are meme information absorbers, where they see a meme online, or they use Facebook as their information source, or they use Instagram for their information source, and they don't dig any deeper. And those teams, like what we said, red versus blue or skins versus shirts, it's so easy to jump on those bandwagons. And I'm actually quite impressed with a bunch of, like, my ex-partner, I've spoken about her a few times, she's a naturopath, and a bunch of her friends are naturopaths, and to watch them change their food consumption after, not saying just me, but like talking to them, going hunting, seeing them introduce meat back into their diet, seeing them actually be like, especially my ex-partner Eddie she wouldn't even look at meat when I brought it in the house. And then I would cook stuff up and she would be like, fuck, that smells nice, but I don't eat meat. I haven't eaten meat in years. And then slowly but surely accepting meat into her diet, and I would have to cook it while we were still together. And then, we broke up a few years ago, and then we're still good friends, but she would call me and be like, oh, how do I cook that wallaby that you made so nice? Or how do I cook this thing? And then, a few months ago, I went around to a barbecue at her house, which is a birthday party for her, and all of her naturopath mates were there. And they had a bigger barbecue than any bloke that I've ever seen. Eddie was on the barbecue for like, I don't know, a few hours, cooking 10 different sorts of meats. All the naturopaths came, they all had meat. And it was like, I was just like, holy crap, like what has happened here? Like, and then they're obviously passing that information down the line to their clients and being like, hey, you need to introduce meat into your diet. How about introducing it this way? And there is that just to see that change in my direct friendship circle with people that I can influence or I've had involvement with is quite amazing. And so it's all of those girls, there's probably 5 or 6 of them who are really like never eating meat again. And to see their health get better and to see their interest in it. And that's one of the things that I'm really like, how do we get these people to grow that and to get that out there into the world? So it is really nice when you see it happen. Like,
yeah, I wonder, like we were talking about, the extremes of the world and the teams of the world, but I do sort of wonder, and I probably think Michaela Peterson being part of the team carnivore for very good reasons. But I think I've been having this discussion today about masculine, feminine, and all that sort of jazz. That page I sent you about the not hypermasculinity, but like the self-love masculinity vibe, and I was like, what's going on here? Like, but anyway, I digress. The Ted Naiman's and the Sean Bakers, and then Michaela Peterson's, and Sean with his Meat RX, he's just continually, as someone that's a orthopedic surgeon, that's he's very brutish. He's basically a carpenter of bones, but then he saw the world holistically, and he saw the world that, hey, if I improve people's overall health, they don't need the knee operation. They don't need to chop their foot off. It's a bit like Gary Fecky. He didn't quite go.
Yeah, Gary Fecky. Yeah,
he didn't quite go as far as maybe carnivore is the option, but he went to the same conclusions. He's very much of that ilk and suffered for it. And then Ted Naiman's sort of general practice and kind of does what he wants. But then Michaela Peterson brings this sort of, I don't know, gentler touch to it, I guess, that, hey.
Yeah, soft feminine vibe to it, yeah.
Yeah, like, hey, like I couldn't do shit. Like my ankles collapsed. I was 21. I've got, horrific rheumatic arthritis, and this has saved me. And now I flourish. I have a child, and that didn't slaughter me. My mental health's good. Just look at my dad. His mental health's not great, and this is partly helping him as well. And this is an option. And maybe the story that we've been told around meat might have been a bit biased.
It's definitely a bit biased. I think a lot of the things at the moment are a bit biased. So it's, where do you go? And I mean, I think it's very personality based at the moment as well. The world is very personality based. So you'll take somebody's opinion that you've been listening to a podcast on or watching them for a while over another person that you might not listen to for very long, or you might not have an affiliation with as far as a feeling towards that person goes. So it's those sorts of things are like, it's, I wouldn't say dangerous, but dangerous to a certain degree. I mean, I don't know if you listen to the Sam Harris talk about Brett Weinstein and the Dark Horse podcast and what he thought about them talking about ivermectin.
Yes, I need to, because I listened to that other one, Eric and Brian on Rebel Wisdom, and they were obviously talking about Sam's response, and so that was that was 2 weeks, but shit, there's so much content out there. You know what it's like.
Yeah. So it's just, I think that like if you're a Sam Harris advocate and you've listened to him and he's helped change your life,
Yep.
and then he's bringing up something about one of his friends and saying something derogatory towards one of his friends, then you're going to be quite easily swayed down a path of making a decision because that person has helped you change your life, or that person has helped you introduce other things into your life that have helped in your meditation practice or in your health practice or whatever it is. And that person not being an expert on a certain topic will sway your opinion or people's opinion in a certain direction. And that is just ramping up at the moment on things across the board, which are making things more team-based and more challenging to get through and stopping people looking a little bit further than, just what's right in front of them. And so when you say to me, what do I do and how do I look at things, they're the things that at the moment that are really fucking shitting me to tears, is certain people pushing certain agendas or their own personal opinion down people's throats and making it like it's the be all and end all. And Sam's had this thing with Brett Weinstein where he's like, I think it's stupid that he's been pushing this ivermectin debate, and people got quite uppity at him and said, fucking, why don't you have him on your show? And then he's like, nah, I'm not even going to talk to him. And it's like, well, that's fucking childish. He backed up his own statements, reinforced X, Y, and Z that he was talking about, and which just pushes people that are in the Sam Harris bandwagon away from looking down any further resolves of information or trying to make their own opinion. So there's so many things like that, and it's weird. Where do we go? Where's the big picture? How do we get out of that stuff?
What's coming into my mind is when we both listened to Neil deGrasse Tyson, and Joe was asking him, as he always does for most people, about aliens, and Neil was just like, nah. And I was like, but mate, nah. And we were both kind of like, Neil, you're like the universe dude.
One of the most arrogant people I've fucking ever listened to. It pissed me off so much listening to that dude. Like, the thing that pissed me off was like, he goes, take this table. We know everything there is to know about this table. And I'm like, you fucking don't. Like, that's not science. Like, we don't have the tools. Like, in 10 years' time, there's going to be a new tool that's going to measure resonance in a different way or fields in a different way or whatever. And so for you to just put your hand down and say, we know everything about this topic is just plain wrong. Like, so it's science versus science once again.
Yeah.
Where's the debate?
Yeah. And he just like, it was like for someone so adventurous to like think about concepts of space-time continuum, like to listen, going back to like Eric Weinstein's expertise is fucking theories of everything. You sit there and try and listen to it and you go, what 14 dimensions? I don't get it. But bloody Neil deGrasse Tyson can probably interpret that and critique that, and he can sort of tell you the pros and cons about that. But when it comes to this vast array, he can tell you about the possibilities of the fact that there's probably you and I out there exactly the same, living exactly the same life, having exactly the same experiences. And
for sure. And then it comes to aliens, and he's like, nah. There's a billion of us. It doesn't make sense.
I know. It's just like, yeah. So we all have our blind spots, and this one's a strange. Sure. It's like within your realm.
Yeah.
It was.
And for me, it's like, I look forward to my mates like pulling me up and going, "Hey, bro, you're wrong." Like, and going, "Here's the information." I look forward to it. It's not an easy thing to take on board a lot of the time. But it's like if they've got better information or they've got better knowledge or they've got a better way of talking about a certain topic, I'm like, bring it on.
Yeah.
Bring it on. Let's hear it. Like,
and especially like for Neil, he's probably, we talked about rabbit holes there. He's as I said, he's talking about the infinite universe. He's, you can't even see him. He's that far down at the level that he's trying to investigate. And he probably hasn't had any bloody time to consider Mr. Alien may be observing us or hanging around or being in this solar system. Like, I don't
for sure,
know.
he's a horse with blinkers on, and he's just in his zone, and that's that. Yeah.
Well, he tours the world lecturing about space. Like, fuck, he's got to cover his bases. But then, it was so strange to just be like, no way.
Yeah. And I think that I think that a lot of the world is like that at the moment. It's like, no, I can't even think about it.
Yeah.
Whatever it is. Yeah.
Whatever it is. No.
Whatever it is, no. I can't think about that.
Yeah. No. So fuck, mate. Things are too uncertain. What are you how are you surviving? What are you doing to keep positive? You can't plan. So what are you doing? Because the best thing to do if you're anxious is make a plan and implement it. But when you can't fucking
you can't make plans at the moment. Yeah.
What are you doing instead?
Just
man?
make artwork.
Just make artwork.
I haven't made artwork in a long time, and I made a very controversial piece the other day.
Yeah.
And I copped it from a lot of my friends, and artwork speaks louder than words sometimes. So
where have you put it?
Yeah. Well, I put it on Instagram. It's a basic impression piece of what's going on with the vaccine and what I'm feeling at the moment with the pressure that's going on, and so I just do that and
digital rendering again.
And, I haven't done a proper. Well, I've been making those like pieces, the photograph, or having a drawing, painting, digital painting kind of thing for a while. So I did one of those. It was really dark and heavy, and I copped it off my mates, and I copped it off a few people. So I was like, well, maybe I'm doing the right thing if I'm pressing a few buttons and making people think. So yeah, just do that, and try and look forward to the time when we're not, in this predicament. And, What's
the landscape like? Is it just make, create, put it online and see what happens, or is there a capacity to here's a question for you. You're digital, so could you NFT some of this stuff?
I could, and what's his name? Zero Alpha Designs. He's been like, Andy, your stuff would be great on those. Hit us up. So I need to thank him. I should actually really get in contact with him and figure out how to do that, because he's been pumping out some amazing artwork. He's actually moved to Takaka, just down the road from one of my mates. So it's one of those things that's like, I'm hanging out to go to New Zealand for a bunch of different reasons, and a bunch of different people that you've put me in contact with that I'm like, fucking hell, when can I go and meet these people and hang out with my old mates over there? But I should be doing that stuff. But I'm just in the process of making. And
so if anyone's got a poop pipe wrapping company in New Zealand, there's someone that wants to immigrate. pay for a 2-week lockdown, and Andy's here.
For sure. I'd love that. There's definitely a few people over there that like you've put me onto that I'm keen to meet. And Justin's one of those guys as well. He just keeps doing amazing stuff and putting up amazing photos. And who was it? Brown Dog.
Yeah.
I was having conversations with him this morning, actually. And
after his big pig photo.
It's as big as a horse. And then we're like COVID conversations, and he was like, I've got to go and make medical equipment. I can't chat right now. And I was like, fuck, you guys are awesome. So there's a few people that I need to say hi to, and thanks for, being a constant source of inspiration over there for me. And definitely a few people over here that have been very proactive in, me doing stuff, like Elliot Sprague and a couple of boys, and Mick Rodolphe, and those sorts of people who, I feel like they've got my back and my opinion, and the things that I do, they've really proactive in helping me to sort through information and look to the bigger picture. And we have good conversations about, not just making an opinion about what's happening right now, but like look towards the future and look to where this sort of level of oppression that we're going through is going to. And it's good to have hunters in the community that are super proactive in not just making a snap decision or joining a team, but they're really like, we got your back. And I feel proud to have met those people and to have a community behind me inside of those things, especially, Kent and Eamon and all of those guys. It's such an amazing community of people who I know that if all goes to shit, that, they've got my back and they'll find me a piece of land, or I'll be able to camp out the back of somewhere when the Australian style CCP social credit system comes into fruition. We've all got out into the middle of nowhere. So yeah.
Which is ironic because Aussie's been like fighting the CCP,
but really that's what's happening. We're going into a social credit system, and that's what's coming. Like, that's my true opinion of it. It's like, this is just the beginning of it. The QR codes, the vaccine passports, all of those things are the push towards a social credit system of who's been a good boy and who's going to toe the government line. And I truly believe that all of those things are moving into that highly pressurized state, and one step at a time our rights are getting taken away. And we need freedom, especially as hunters, especially of people who need to be in the bush and need to be looking after the environment and taking care of the environment. And now that we're not allowed to do that, it's really challenging. So yeah.
That's you've heard it said across multiple platforms that having those skills, having that courage and knowledge to know that, hey, I can go out there, like, hey, I might die trying, but if it comes to being out there and trying, well, at least you do have some skills, and you have some courage, and you have some confidence to handle it, and you're not getting past the holy shit, I'm in the wild. It's like, I'm in the wild and I'm gonna go do it.
Yeah, that's right. We've got the equipment to do it already.
Yeah,
totally. Yeah. So, well, it's good. And then, like, the amount of people that are like, "Oh, Andy, where are you going to go when shit hits the fan?" It's like, fuck off. I'm not telling you. Like, for sure. Get me on the satellite.
Oh, excuse me, mate. As I said, awesome. I needed to get you on to do episode 200. This is the 4th time I've had you on.
I feel blessed that it's number 200. Thanks, mate.
No, just like I said, like, let's get on. Let's have a rant. Let's have a good yarn, and let off a bit of steam, especially for you guys in Australia. Like, we feel pretty. Not. I don't know what the word is. Guilty. It's a bit of guilt over here that we just kind of carry on. We can't go anywhere, but it's not a bad place to be. As I said, we're God's own, and you're the lucky country. But I'm looking at you guys going, some of that luck seems to be running out. And so it was really, really awesome to have you on and chew the fat and share some ideas and like blow them up. And we're probably wrong about most of them, but it was good to just sort of talk them through, and hopefully it's been cathartic for a few people, and expressed what many people have been feeling, and probably a little bit shy to say as well. So thanks very much.
I'm always going to speak from my heart, mate. I'll do it. I don't care if anyone else will, but I'll do it. So thanks very much for having us on. I feel pretty blessed. I actually looked through the back catalogue today, and I was like, the last 2 was like 130 and then 170, and then now I'm on 200. So it feels good. So if I can just say anything to anybody out there, it's like, don't judge your mates from what choices they're going to make for their own health or for their own well-being or for the community or for the greater good. Just stick together and don't let them take our civil rights, and don't fall for the vaccine passports. And everybody's in this together, and we just got to hug each other up and love each other and support each other through those decisions that are being made. And I think that we can't separate anymore. We need to have International Hug Day, and everybody get together and give each other a hug and say I love you, and look out for your mates if they're in lockdown, and send them messages and tell them that you love them. And thanks for having us, mate. Appreciate you. Love you. Hope everything's good. Thanks, buddy.
Love you too, mate. Bloody awesome.